What is up, guys? It is time for an MLB Deeper Dive, and there is no deeper you can go than the 3-game slate, talking about it for an hour today. For some of us, for the second time in a day, but I'm going to uncover all the nuances I can, being back at the slate once more with a new pitcher as well. And I am Chris Spags, joined once again by a man who's with me all the time on Mondays on the Deeper Dive. He's our Director of Customer Success at Awesemo and an all-around great human being. He's Terry McBride. How you doing, Terry?
Doing pretty well, my friend. Doing pretty well. It was a good weekend. Kind of a quiet Monday. Not a ton going on DFS-wise today. Not a ton going on behind the scenes. So catching up on some stuff. But hey, I think you're a great person too, by the way. Thanks for that.
Thank you. I appreciate you lying for all the audience out here, but that is the positive vibes here, always in the air on the Awesemo YouTube channel. Hit that like button if you can, guys, and also make sure to subscribe to the channel because we have content going on all day long, whether it is a mediocre slate like the one today or some of the better stuff going on. Obviously, still a 2-gamer for the NBA, so lots of content, a 3-hour block coming up for that one right after this on the channel. So always make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell to see the content that we have going on the Awesemo YouTube channel all day long. Also, make sure to check out the promo code MLB Deeper Dive because that'll get you 15% off your first week of Awesemo Plus if you go use that right now at awesemo.com/join. That promo code MLB Deeper Dive will give you access to all the premium tools and data we talk about here. Top stacks tool, top pitchers tool, player projections, ownership projections, as well as the lineup builder tool. And it's a bunch of great stuff on there. So go use that promo code. It's only active during the show to get 15% off your first week with that promo code MLB Deeper Dive. And also shout out to our sponsor for the day, Jock Market, which is a fun product out there, different than your other DFS sites because they've basically turn fantasy sports to a stock exchange where you can forget about waiting until the end of the game to make money. You can get minutes or get money rather with every minute of every game, every pitch of every game, every at bat of every game. That's how the Jock Market goes. They have daily markets for the NBA, MLB, NHL, and PGA. You can make real money every hour, every minute, every second of any match or game. So I don't know why I said that twice, but point being, really got to drive that point home. Every second you're making money on Jock Market. Use the pregame IPO to pick up shares of your favorite players, then buy, sell, or hold during the game based on your analysis. Download the app to get started and use our exclusive Awesemo promo code Awesemo for a $50 bonus on your first deposit. It is an exclusive offer only for the Awesemo community, so take advantage of it today. Promo code Awesemo for a $50 bonus over at Jock Market, JOCKMKT. Terry, take me through your overall thoughts on this slate. Obviously, we're going to hit on basically everything we can here. You're going to probably see the return of the Chalk Talk segment because we're going to have to do something at the halfway point here, but we got 3 games on FanDuel, 2 on DraftKings, unless you are playing the all-day slate, which is not the biggest prize pools out there. So Terry, any overarching thoughts for you on a slate that I think anybody could say is going to be one of the uglier ones we've had all year?
Yeah, I think this is probably going to end up as one of the ugliest of the entire season. Not only do we get a bizarre 2-game slate just with the night games, the West Coast games on DK, but we get that weird chopped up 5-10 start on FanDuel with the afternoon makeup game between the Marlins and the Sox, then bouncing out to all the way to the 9:30 West Coast games. It's just a messy, strange slate that with the sites. FanDuel's priced their main tournament up to a $9 entry today because why not on a day that everybody's just itching to play double the price of entries? So it's just kind of, I don't want to say stay away because I'm sure I'll play something, but it's just not an appealing slate to me. So we'll get into it. We'll break it down the same way, but I'm just not excited about it. Between all of those different weird things about the slate, there's also just no pitching. Dylan Bundy is by far, to me, the best pitcher on the slate, and that's saying something because I don't think Dylan Bundy's all that great. He's around league average this year. So just a mess.
Yeah, so let's talk about the slate here. And there is one game, as I mentioned, that is going to be mostly exclusive to FanDuel for their slate today, where Miami and Boston, we did have a pitcher change there. No longer Pablo Lopez, as it looked like it was going to be this morning. It is, in fact, going to be Zach Thompson, a guy who's been basically a career minor leaguer who this year has a 30% K rate for himself, historically a 20% K rate. And Terry, I guess let's talk about him because he's one new thing to hit on here that we did not know earlier in the day. Any thoughts on him? And I guess, would you consider him playable at all on FanDuel, or as a single pitcher site, and a guy like Zach Thompson is certainly a pitcher who can be there?
Yeah, you can play him in that he will be on the slate and he has a price tag. I don't know that I would be rostering him against this Red Sox team. I wasn't really excited to be rostering Pablo Lopez in this spot. I think he's going to look a lot better tomorrow going up against the Marlins in Miami. I think he'll be in play there depending on what's on the slate. But yeah, I wasn't looking to roster him going up against this Red Sox team. And now getting Zach Thompson, who we don't know that much about, making his major league debut at 27. So that says something right there about how this kid kind of profiles in terms of his prospect pedigree. There's just not much to like about him. Just looking at some of the traditional scouting, he's got an average fastball, maybe a slider that's maybe creeping into plus territory, a below average curve, below average command grades. He's just a below average traditional prospect kind of a guy. And then looking at some of his minor league numbers, that seems to hold up. You're talking about a kid who was pitching in the mid-20s in terms of strikeouts in the minor leagues. And I'm talking about 3 years at high A, where 2 of which he was under 20% by a decent amount. And then the third year, he jumped up above to 24.7, pitching to above a 4 xFIP in most of those years, or excuse me, above a 4 FIP, slightly below a 4 xFIP, 3.57, 3.80 in high A. This is not a major league pitcher. So I would not roster him. I would definitely consider some Red Sox bats going up against him. Roster whoever you want from the Red Sox. You're going to have to get cute with it to get any kind of uniqueness in this short slate.
Yeah, I would agree with everything you're saying there, Thompson. And it's kind of a bummer. This is in a spot where we're going to have JD Martinez today. He's still out for Boston. So always been a guy who's raked against left-hand pitching, not going to be there. The one that jumps out to me with Boston's lineup, and we're going to talk more about the hitting in the back half of the show, but going against Thompson, and maybe does give me some use for Thompson, though. I think he would have been more play on DraftKings at a low price tag. And I guess maybe if you're playing the DK showdown, maybe a little more there. This is a pretty weak Boston lineup with no JD against left-hand pitching. Like looking through it right now, there's a couple guys that have pop. You have Bogarts. You have
quick timeout on you.
Yeah.
This is the Zach Thompson that's a righty. Zach with a K is a lefty.
Oh, okay. Oh,
this kid's a 27-year-old righty. There are 2 Zach Thompsons, one with a K, one with an H in FanGraphs.
Fantasy Schmabs had him as a lefty, so they must have also had their.
Yeah. This is the Zach Thompson.
They still have him as a lefty too. Okay. So that does, okay. That changes it a little bit then. Cause I was like, what a crappy lineup to be putting out against a lefty now that they know. So let me just update that here. My bad on that one, but yeah, I usually Labs is pretty good with that. So I'm surprised they didn't get that one right.
Yeah. I think they probably tripped over the same thing. It would be better if the other kid was pitching for, it would be better for Miami if the other kid was pitching. He seems like a better prospect.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Just to talk through as you're updating that, I can talk through the Red Sox lineup a little bit if you want me.
Yeah. So no, I got it here too, but yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you were in the middle of it. So
So no, I think now that I know it is going to be a righty Zach Thompson instead of the lefty one, the lefty lineup looked much worse. I do think though it still falls off the cliff for the most part when you get past the top 4, top 5, where Marwin Gonzalez, Kevin Plawecki. I know Marwin did just have the nice play yesterday against the Yankees, but in this spot, I feel like overall. I don't love the Boston line. I like them a bit less when I thought Zach Thompson was a lefty. So I'll say that. So I might have to just walk this take back. But I think the top 5, Terry, is going to be where people are going for Boston. But if he could survive against these guys and it being a slightly weaker lineup than it usually would have been, I think Zach Thompson could be useful theoretically if you are playing that DK all day slate. Still on FanDuel, probably not getting there. But I guess, is there any thought to you? Sometimes the unknown pitching, I feel like sometimes it doesn't matter the guy's talent level, just that he's out there. People haven't seen him before. And I feel like that could give me some cause for concern that Boston maybe doesn't tee off on him and they just don't know what to expect, because I'm sincerely doubting their scouting teams are really looking deep into Zach Thompson before the series.
Yeah, there's probably not much of a book on this kid. I mean, that said, they do have a decent book on anybody who's pitched that long in organized, professional baseball at the minor league levels. He's been in the White Sox system for a number of years, so he was an American League kid. So they might have a little bit of a book on him, but probably not much. The thing that would concern me there, give me hesitation to even give him that much credit, though, is he's got like no command, according to, again, looking at the traditional scouting, which is not the most reliable thing. But for a grade like command, a grade like control, it kind of does become a little bit reliable. So I'd be concerned about that. Like typically you'll see if an unheralded prospect comes in, but he's a real command control type specialist who can paint the corners and has a couple effective pitches, then maybe he sneaks through. This kid operating with basically one potentially plus pitch and no control, no command is probably in trouble here. Just looking at that Red Sox lineup, the top 5 hitters who you mentioned is where all the weight is going to be in terms of ownership. Even without JD in there, that top 5 hitters is averaging creating runs 26% better than average. And you get Titanic power in Rafael Devers. You get Xander Bogaerts in there. You get Alex Verdugo, who's been smoking everything this year so far. So I really like the top end of the Red Sox lineup. They're just difficult to roster in any kind of unique ways. And then, Marwin's been a dead stick for most of the year, and most of the past couple of years, he's been like floating around the Mendoza line, just not the same dynamic utility guy that we all remember from Houston. Kevin Plawecki in there, if you want to grab a wacky catcher to one-off on or to build into your stack on DK, or as a dead minimum price one-off for no ownership on FanDuel. He's not entirely lacking in power upside, Plawecki, so I could see that. Enrique Hernandez is at least a professional hitter to some degree down at the bottom of the lineup. He's a 224, 277, 376 this year, but we know there's a little bit more than that from Enrique. And then Bobby Dahlbeck's got a ton of power, but struggles to put the bat on the ball. So there are options later in the lineup for low ownership, where you're giving up a plate appearance, you're giving up some reliability, some potential production with the hit tool. And I think on a slate like this, like, yeah, we do need to home run hunt a little bit, but this is a slate where it's going to come down to base hits, I think, to really decide things across all the positions. So it is a concern.
And it is adverse conditions too for Thompson either way. So again, not really going to be playing any of the sites, but is going to be pitching at Boston today with 90-degree weather, 50% humidity. So it could be a little more humid there to make the ball fly more, but it's going to be a spot where it does seem like Boston has the highest implied total and going to be well-deserved today for stacking up on FanDuel or the DK all day slate if you are a masochist playing that one for low prizes. Let's talk about Nick Pavetta a little bit more, because that's going to be more pertinent for FanDuel as well. And you can make the case that Pavetta is the best pitcher on the slate based on his results this year. We talked about a little bit more in the MLB strategy show this morning and Terry, I'm actually curious your thoughts on this, because I think Pavetta's, I wouldn't say like a ticking time bomb, but a guy who to me just looks like he's due to have worse days. He's walking guys at a really high rate, taking a long time to finish guys off on at bats too, with 4.3 pitches per at bat, 11% walk rate for him on the year as well. And he is getting, I think, a little bit lucky. The BABIP maybe not showing it that much, a 280 BABIP compared to a 300 since 2019, but the strikeout rate, I just feel like it's so much higher than where he was historically. There's a little more on his velocity, but the swing strike rate still basically flat and 11% swing strike rate compared to 10.3%, 29% chase rate compared to 29.6% since 2019. Feels to me like Pavetta, maybe he gets through this spot, Terry, but it is a Marlins team that is not good. 26% K rate for them on the year against right-hand pitching. But I think there is some risk with Pavetta that for FanDuel on the slate, mentioned it earlier this morning. So if you heard both shows, my apologies for kind of repeating the same point, but Pavetta in the spot, I feel like you could play him, but I think stacking against him on FanDuel would be one of the things that I would like to do the most, just to try to get some leverage on that field.
Yeah, this is a slate where I think you're going to need pieces of everything, and you're going to need to come back against some of the more popular pitchers with some bats, and the Marlins are a good way to do it here. There is ownership on some of the better bats at the top of the lineup, but we get some interesting names toward the middle/end of the lineup here. Particularly Isan Diaz, a lefty, stands out to me from late in the lineup. He's a bit of a sleeping tiger on this one. He's got some pop in his bat. He's only 2,100. He's going under 5% projected ownership. I think similar for Jorge Alfaro, a catcher, right-handed stick, decent power profile, could easily turn on one against a guy like Nick Pavetta, who I do think is pitching, to your point, kind of maybe not above his head is the right way to put it, but he's crept up a little bit better than he's been. I think he's more a league average type pitcher. He's crept up a little bit above the league average. Struggling today. A little bit above the league average with a 27.4% strikeout rate over his 59 2/3 innings this year. But the walks are still up 11.3% walks, 4.24 xFIP is fine. It's serviceable for sure. It's not bad, but it's not great. It's not one of these sparkling numbers. 1.22 whip, similar kind of story. And with the 11% induced swinging strikes, he's only throwing 27.3% combined called plus swinging strikes. So that's not the greatest rate in the world. So it's not like he's pounding the zone and really throwing a ton of strikes. He's 62nd percentile hard hit rate allowed, 64th expected slugging percentage. So he's doing okay in terms of the contact metrics, but he's 47th percentile barrel rate allowed, 47th average exit velo allowed, 25th percentile with that ugly walk rate, 29th percentile chase rate. I think it's a league average pitcher operating a little bit above his head. I think he could get through this lineup. The Marlins, like you said, they strike out at a high rate, sixth worst in baseball in the split. They've also got just a 131 team ISO in the split, creating runs 13% worse than average, 37 home runs against righties on the year, all below average marks. So I think he could definitely put up at worst a reasonable, mid 20s, low 30s kind of a start on FanDuel, which is probably all we need out of this slate. If he hit 30, that would beat all my current projections for every pitcher on the slate. So that's kind of what we're operating with.
Yeah, the main slate ownership projections are free today, so you can check them out. We will still do money time at the halfway point of the show and give you guys the top 5 owned players, but you can check them all out for yourself. And actually, I'll drop the link in the chat so you guys can take a look. But on FanDuel, Pavetta right now projects for 33% expected ownership, and that's a number to me that I have no issue getting to that 33% number. But I do think with the rest of the lineups that you're not getting Pavetta, sprinkling in some Miami, a lot of guys here should have some power. Adam Duvall, one of the top home run odds guys today that you can find every day on Odds Shopper. The home run run props, which we talked about a little bit at some length this morning on the strategy show, that maybe some of them are a little bit overvalued, but still a decent benchmark to see who Vegas is sort of valuing as the guys who are going to have the potential to have the most pop on the slate. And I do think there are enough guys here. Duvall, Chisholm up top. I just call him Jazz. Like, Jazz is a much cooler name. Jazz up top. Starling Marte. Like, I think this stack overall, if you got to a 5-man stack against Pavetta and try to target him, sort of having one of those days that drags him back down to where he's supposed to be, like Terry's talking about, I think that's where Miami has the most utility to me. So I'm not going to be in play, obviously, on DraftKings for the main slate where that game is a consideration. But if you're playing FanDuel, I just think trying to get against Pavetta and target him too, kind of falling as the weather heats up. I think he's one of these guys that's kind of benefited from being a little bit cooler here, where he hasn't felt the full brunt of what Boston's going to be like when it's hot and humid. Yeah, for sure. And I think this Marlins lineup is at the point where they're healthy and they're maybe a little bit underappreciated. Like, they're not, the numbers back up, to this point in the season, that they have not been good. I'm not saying this is a good lineup that everybody thinks is bad, but individually, the hitters that make up the lineup, now that Jazz Chisholm's back at the top of it, Jasarado, Chisholm, if you want to get formal about it, Starling Marte back hitting second, leading into Jesus Aguilar, Corey Dickerson, Garrett Cooper, Adam Duvall. I mentioned Isan Diaz. There's a good amount of power in that lineup, and there's a few guys who have a decent hit tool, have some speed. So I like the shape of this lineup. I've talked about it a few times since last week, but there's a couple guys hitting with above a 200 ISO, creating runs. Top 5 hitters in the lineup, currently creating runs, 23% better than average. If you remember the number that I gave for it, this isn't a JD Martinez Boston Red Sox lineup, but that was about the same number in terms of weighted run creation plus. So it's an interesting little lineup at the top there. They're getting ownership. It's not like they're sneaky here, but I think they could definitely be have a productive day. And if people slip, if that ownership comes down a little bit, it's a spot to take advantage of. Let's talk about some of the other pitching we have here. And guys, if you can't hit that like button, we appreciate it a bunch here. Obviously, you're going to be, the shows tend to be a little slower on the days where the main slate just doesn't appeal to a lot of people. So we definitely appreciate the support from all of you guys in here, but hit that like button if you can right now. And we'll stick some more questions. I see Danielle Brown's got a general question. We'll hit on that in a second and more. We talk about stacks, but don't worry. I do have your question flagged and we'll get to it. Dylan Bundy at pitcher. You mentioned him earlier, Terry, as being a guy that you liked a lot on the slate, or maybe was viewing him as the best pitcher. And I do think you can sort of dice it up, whether it's him or Pavetta. Bundy on the year, about a league average strikeout rate guy, 23.9% K rate, has been at league average the last couple of years, 24.1% since 2019. But the results for him have kind of just been, I think, the same that we would expect based on his longer term sample size. Not a guy bringing anything new to the table, but anything a little bit down in terms of swinging strike rate and up a little bit in velocity. But the chase rate also down slightly. So I think based on what I'm seeing, I feel like he's been a slightly worse pitcher this year. That can happen too with some of the, I guess he's always been playing a tough power park. So that's something for Bundy that he's always got to fight off. But going against Kansas City, Terry, it is a kind of a tough matchup. They are not striking out above league average, only a 22.7% rate for them on the year against right-hand pitching. And they've been hot too. I think that you are running into kind of a buzzsaw with some of these bats. The ownership going to be there definitely heavily on both DraftKings and FanDuel, as you'd expect on a short slate. But Bundy, talk to me about him, because it seems like you might be more of a believer in him than I am. And I just think he's an average guy. And granted, there aren't a lot of even average guys in the slate, so I get it. But 65% ownership on DK is a pretty lofty number. Yeah, there's just untenable ownership on some of these guys on DK, but we're operating with 4 pitchers and we got to pick 2, right? So it's a little bit difficult. I think there's just going to be a ton of people out there just locking in Dylan Bundy and Albert Alzolay and moving along to their hitters on this slate on DK. So, maybe you take some chances on the other guys we'll talk about in a minute. But Bundy, for me, it's not that I'm excited about him. I actually don't think he's all that great of a pitcher. Like, I think people remember the pedigree when he came into the league, saw a little bit of a breakout last season when he was up around 28 and change percent strikeout rate. Thought maybe he was catching on, and I thought so myself. I was guilty of it, and he's definitely improved out in Los Angeles since he was in Baltimore. But it's just not really been there to any kind of ace level, any kind of major fantasy upside level. So he is my highest projected FanDuel pitcher right now. But that's still, like I said, under 30 points. It's at 29.91 to give away my personal FanDuel projection for anybody that wants it, which is, for 7,300, that's fine. On a bigger slate, that would be in play as an okay value guy that maybe we take a look at. But I don't love the matchup here. Like you said, the Royals don't strike out all that much. Their team ISO is around league average. It's 151 in the split. They've hit 42 home runs in the split. Their run creation is 6% below average. But they've also gotten a little bit healthier recently. They're also just, I think they're a functional offense now, getting the shortstop back, Adalberto Mondesi back. So I do think there's more upside in this Royals lineup than they've shown. And they're not getting a ton of ownership, just looking at how they compare
on the FanDuel slate, they're all in the teens because I think a lot of FanDuel ownership is going to go to Bundy. He's trending around 40% owned as of my last update. So for me, it's probably a spot where, despite how he's projecting for me, I would be more inclined to get to some of these Royals bets that I believe in than the Bundy side of it. I think there's reason to believe that Bundy could give us the best start, but I don't know that it's going to be that much different than what Alzolay might give us, than what Pavetta might give us, that we have to like overload on Bundy, especially when it would be to the detriment of being able to stack Royals on FanDuel.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, everything you're saying there. And I think I'm with you on Bundy. I get why the ownership is there. I certainly can get why people will find him really easy to plug in at a reasonable price tag on DraftKings, as well as why you plug him in on FanDuel too. But I'm with you. Like, you're going to play every pitcher on the slate. For the most part, you're going to play the vast majority of bats on the slate in different configurations. But I think Bundy, to me, if I got 50% Bundy, that's more than enough on a slate where he is projected for 65% ownership on DraftKings. And I'm willing to take stabs at some of these other guys. And one guy, Terry, that I am willing to take a stab on, those ownership has come up a lot more than where it was earlier in the on the MLB strategy show. But Jackson Kowar now projected for 29% ownership. He's a guy who's been above a 30% K rate guy in minor league baseball this year. And I feel like in this spot, the Angels do strike out at least at league average on the year. The lineup they have projected today may be a little bit lower in strikeouts, but Kowar, to me, I feel like on a short slate, if people weren't willing to get there, he was more appealing at 30% ownership. Maybe you're starting to come a little bit the other way where 20% just feels like the target number that I was comfortable with this morning. And I think probably where I'd go. But if you're crunching, like, I wouldn't hate going to more Kowar just because it's such an ugly slate. And Kowar without Adbert Alzolay, I think, is a decent move. Kowar with Bundy, I don't hate that one, even though you're not going to get that win bonus. I feel like he's a guy to be on the slate that it does make you more different than a lot of the other bats. He's going to be less owned in some of the hitters. And I think that's something out there that's noteworthy for Kowar, where even though he himself might not be a noteworthy guy, I'm willing to go there. Are you?
Yeah, I am. I actually wrote about him a little bit in my article this afternoon. I mean, it's a small slate, so I wrote up 3 out of the 6 pitchers. But I think he's definitely in play. The minor league numbers are there. He's a high-end prospect. He was just outside of Baseball America's top 100 in the last year. He's KC's number 4 overall prospect. Pitched for University of Florida on the same team as Brady Singer, who we've already seen get called up by the same Royals organization. He's got a plus fastball and a plus changeup, an excellent changeup. It still needs to develop. He's probably a little bit early, but they need him. He was 3.66 xFIP in AAA this season, over 6 starts. He was 5-0 with a .88 WHIP, 33.9% strikeout rate, over 31 2/3. He allowed just 3 runs and no homers in AAA to 121 hitters that he faced. So he's having a nice year. He's on form. He's stretched out. I think he could give us 5-6 innings here. Probably not 6. You might be in jeopardy of getting the quality start. They might turn it over to the bullpen. And it's a targetable bullpen for offense on the other side of things. So I'd worry about it there in terms of avoiding Angels if you are rostering him. Maybe it's a spot where you roster a hitter against the pitcher, hope they get into the bullpen, and you get a unique lineup from that angle. But I do think he's very much in play. I would probably get over the field on him on DK. I think it's the only approach to building truly unique lineups.
Yeah, and I think you'll still be getting a good amount of Angels. We'll talk about that more with the stacks. But Kowar, to me, just a guy that I was encouraged by the numbers that I saw from his minor league page. And I think certainly going to be a guy who, if he's going to have anything to offer, I think this first start here where you just don't know the profile on him necessarily quite as much if you are the Angels. I think something that we talked about, I think his stuff's better than Thompson based on what I saw. So I'm willing to take that stab a little bit more. Such a lot of ownership going to Ryan Weathers, who does project for just shy of 50% ownership today. And Ryan Weathers, I think, has been fine on the year. His pitch count's starting to come up, as we talked about this morning on the strategy show, but still 55 pitches per appearance on the year, 3.3 innings per appearance so far as well. Not getting strikeouts, under league average with a 19% strikeout rate. The swing, strike rate, and chase rate are also pretty low in a way that I just don't have the interest level in him, Terry, that I think the field will. And honestly, even looking at the Kowar numbership, I wouldn't mind flipping the ownership. I think the more that I think about it, where if you had, 50% Kowar still seems like a lot, but if you had 40% Kowar and then cut down your Weathers exposure to closer to 25 to 30, it's just a lot of people going to Weathers. And I think he's a fine pitcher, but he's a guy to me that just doesn't stand out enough and might not go deep enough in the game. And I think there's legitimate questions about Weathers where going against the Cubs too, like that's a really dangerous spot. I would say at least as dangerous, if not more so than what the Angels are going to be bringing today.
Absolutely. Totally agree with you. I would be definitely looking, if I'm playing on DraftKings, to roster it that way, where you get ahead of the field on the other kid, get behind the field on Weathers, let the field make that mistake. I think Weathers is going to be a good pitcher. I do not think he's currently a good pitcher. They moved him back and forth between the pen and the starting rotation. He's made 7 starts now, 39 in the third innings pitched, 19.1% strikeout rate, not good enough. 4.47 xFIP, not good enough. 0.99 whip is fine, but only inducing 8.3% swinging strikes, 26.2% call plus swinging. He's not there yet. And he's going up against a Cubs offense that hits everything hard. Whether they're good or not, whether they're making contact or not is debatable. But when they make contact, they drive the ball. They hit everything hard. Even a guy struggling like Ian Happ is in, I was looking at him yesterday, is in like the high 80 something percentile of hard hit rate so far still this year. So, I mean, these guys tattoo the ball when they connect. And Weathers is sitting 15th percentile hard hit rate, 9th percentile average exit velocity allowed, 14th percentile expected slugging percentage allowed, just the 17th percentile strikeout rate, just the 8th percentile chase rate. This kid's not there, and he is going to get hit hard, and he is going to have a big score put up against him at a certain point. It might not come tonight, but if I'm taking somebody off the board, it would be him, and it would definitely be with that much of the field getting to him. It would be a great angle into this slate to just kind of either do a dramatic undercut, or I don't know if you want to take him off the board completely, but I would get well under and get over on Coar. It's like I said, with Coar, it's the only approach to getting unique on that DraftKings slate in terms of pitching.
Yeah, I would still get some others, even though I agree with you. Like, I think there's a lot of cause for concern. You look at his righty splits too. Like, he's been getting good results against lefties, or, good relative to what he's been doing. But you look at the hard hit rate, 47% hard hit rate, a 226 ISO allowed to righties, compared to a 0.043 to lefties. And obviously he's going to be better against lefties because he's a lefty himself. But I think there are some real causes for concern, and enough righties here where, like, even Patrick Wisdom in the middle of the order, he's been smashing the ball. He's got a 97.6 exit velocity on the year, 21.7 degree launch angle. Like, those are going to level out a little bit more, but there's a lot of dudes here on the Chicago lineup, whether they be lefties or righties, but the righties in particular, I just have a lot of concern going against Weathers. And I think to me, he's just one guy projected for 50% ownership. I would get half that. And I feel like if you spread that out as much as you can to the other guys, I think that would be a strategy that I would support very much on DraftKings today. Last pitcher we have to hit on before we talk about some of the stacks, do some chalk talk, all that stuff. Adbert Alzolay, he's going to be the chalk pitcher, it looks like, on all the sites today, though I guess actually a little bit less owned than Dylan Bundy, but still, chalk even by a two-game slate standards. But he's been really good on the year, Terry, a 27% K rate. To me, he's much more justifiable at 60 to 75% ownership than Dylan Bundy is. Bundy's a league average strikeout guy. Alzolay has been blowing him away pretty much since he's been called up, and he's pitching now enough into games, 83 pitches per appearance this year, 5.5 innings per appearance as well. I think that Alzolay is the strongest pitcher on the slate, Terry, but how are you feeling about him? And I guess, is there any cause for concern you would have going against San Diego?
He's projecting for me just 2 points behind the mark that I gave for Bundy, so he's in the 27 FanDuel point range, which is fine for this slate. He's going up against a tough Padres lineup. San Diego is second best in baseball, 21.1% strikeout rate against righties this season. Creating runs 2% worse than average, but they've hit 50 home runs in the split, which is 10th most in baseball. Collective ISO of just 146, so they're not hitting a ton of power, not driving the ball a ton other than the home runs that they're hitting. But they are hitting some home runs, and they don't strike out against right-handed pitching. And I think they're just, they're a good functional baseball team. Maybe they're not, if not the best in terms of DFS production, but people like to get to them. I think this is a tough spot for Alzolay, but I think he's definitely somebody we have to roster. And like you said, he's been pitching well, 3.35 xFIP, 0.91 whip over 54 and 2/3 innings, striking out 27.2% of hitters over 10 starts. It's reasonably fine length, and given a short slate of pitchers from which we can choose, it's perfectly fine in terms of his ability to give us depth, give us that potential quality start bonus. So I think we have to go there. He's inducing 12% swinging strike, only walking 5.2% of hitters. He's getting hit a little hard, 37th percentile hard hit rate allowed, 41st average exit velo, 34th expected slugging percentage. But I think we just kind of have to roll with those numbers, just given the lack of choice that we're dealing with here. He's projecting as the second best pitcher on the slate for me. If he's 1 and Dylan Bundy's 2, I would not be surprised at all. I think they're both right there. So he's definitely on the board. 16.8% ownership projection on FanDuel, definitely appealing over there. I like the idea on FanDuel of getting to Alzolay with Cubs bats and Royals bats. The Cubs bats are not getting where they should be owned, particularly lefties, if they're in the lineup. Anthony Rizzo and Jock Peterson. We mentioned Weathers is succeeding against lefties, but maybe not to the point where we want to completely rule these guys out like everybody seems to be. And then Pat Wisdom, who has 7 home runs in his 36 plate appearances for a 676 ISO, which is the highest I ever remember seeing ISO. Definitely going to come back to earth, of course, but he's a righty. He's in the middle of that projected lineup, not drawing any attention, not drawing any ownership. Ian Happ, who I mentioned, hits from both sides of the plate. not drawing much ownership. So there's a lot of good ways to roster those Cubs and Royals bats together and get to one or the other pitcher from those games. Have the stack support your pitcher's potential at a win. Maybe you're rostering 3-3-2s if you're operating on FanDuel, 3-3-1-1s. Get different with things. But I think those are two teams that I want to look at in terms of how I can roster lesser owned bats in good spots, because I think they are good spots.
Yeah, we're going to talk more about the bats here, but let's do a run through money time. I feel like we've talked enough about pitching, and I'll make one more point about pitching too, but let's get through the top 5 owned plays on DraftKings and FanDuel. I'll flip the hat. And again, the ownership projections are free on the site today. So if you want to do your own at-home version of money time and read out the top 5 to yourself a couple times over the next few hours, feel free to do that as well. But here's the version we have right now. Updated an hour ago are the ownership projections, and the top 5 on DraftKings look like Dylan Bundy, number 1 at 64.4%. Number 2, Adbert Alzolay at 58.5%. Number 3, Ryan Weathers at 48%. Number 4, Shohei Ohtani at 47%. And number 5, Whit Merrifield at 44%. Terry, out of that top 5 on DraftKings, I think we're going to be in agreement here. But the one who really stands out, I guess, hitters, it's sort of tough because the hitters a little too highly owned. But I still think out of that 5, Ryan Weathers is the one that just jumps out to me that, well, based on what we talked about, I would come under on.
Yeah, definitely. I don't love the spot for Weathers. And like I said, I just think there's a lot of indicators that say this kid's pitched over his head to get to the numbers that he's at and is just not ready yet. So it at some point soon will come crashing down if they continue putting him in the starting rotation. It might not be tonight, but yeah, I think that number's high.
And the top 5 on FanDuel, where again, there's one more game on that one, but Shohei Ohtani, number 1 at 42.4%. Number 2, Dylan Bundy at 40%. Number 3, Xander Bogaerts at 39%. Number 4, Rafael Devers at 36% expected ownership. And number 5, Jazz Chisholm at 35%. Out of that top 5, Terry, I do like the Miami bats, but I think Jazz Chisholm should not be in the top 5 owned if I had to guess.
Jazz has been a popular guy lately, particularly on that FanDuel slate. He's only 3,100 over there, eligibility at second and short. I get it. I like the kid. I think he's very, very talented, one of the top young players in the league probably over the next couple of years. But that probably is a little bit aggressive, even for a slate this size. If that's a spot where it'll allow you to make interesting pivots with your second base or shortstop ownership, that's a position where I don't mind going to a less regarded hitter. You get some guys, particularly at second base. Like you could drop it down to, I've mentioned Isan Diaz a couple times already. He's going to be at 4.6% ownership, hitting later in the same lineup from the left side of the plate against a righty. He's got sneaky power. It's not even a comparison in terms of the ownership potential there. So it's an easy pivot to make. That's a position where you can make that pivot and maybe get away with something there going against the field. So I do like Jazz Chisholm. I like the spot for him, but that's heavy ownership. So I'd probably try and get under.
Yeah, I think that makes some sense. Let's talk about some more of this hitting then. And I guess we could start with Miami because we're talking about Chisholm, but it's a lot of ownership going his way. But the rest of the stack, it does look like, according to the top stack Sewell for FanDuel today, also going to be a little bit overowned. Actually, one of the more overowned teams on the slate. In fact, it could be the highest overowned based on the ownership projections, it seems. And that surprises me. Like I do think targeting Pavetta today was a move that I would have found appealing, but for them to be the highest aggregate ownership share and also the most over leveraged, kind of a scary spot to be in. And I guess this would push me more towards Pavetta because he was not in that top 5 owned play. As I mentioned earlier, he's projected for around 30% ownership. And I think on FanDuel, I'm not a Pavetta believer, but I think based on these numbers, I might be gravitating a little more towards Pavetta because Miami just seems overowned.
So for me, I agree that Miami's overowned, but just because the field's getting to it doesn't necessarily make it a spot where it's going to push me into the pitcher, because I still believe that the team going against him could definitely be productive here, or at least productive enough that's going to push his score down. So I don't love to look at it that way, but I completely get what you're saying. And yeah, on a short slate like this, if you're not rostering Marlins bats, it definitely does make sense to look at the opposing pitcher just because it's taking advantage of a spot that you're not on and giving you a little bit of room to operate. So yeah, what you're saying is definitely apt. It's just a tricky spot. I would rather be on the Marlins side of this, but it's difficult. The one guy that keeps coming up for me, and I'll cite a couple numbers this time to make it stick maybe. In 2019, Isan Diaz, in 435 plate appearances at AAA for Miami, hit 26 home runs. 132 ISO, or WRC plus rather. So he was creating runs 32% better than average, had a 273 ISO, a 305, 395, 578 triple slash. That is a very nice AAA season. The kid's got pop, the kid's got a good bat, and nobody's going to be on him, and he hits from the left side of the plate. That's my one low-owned Marlin that I can throw out there. Jorge Alfaro does have power. but on it's a spot where I don't know that he's at any kind of advantage to who he normally is, but he's also not drawing ownership. You're losing a plate appearance, almost definitely going to the 8th spot, where Diaz, if he's hitting 7th, maybe connects more in and correlates better with the middle of the lineup. So that's my one way to get different if you're rostering Marlins is roster Misan Diaz. Everybody else is going to be really, really popular, but I do like the spots. They're projecting well. Mid-range home run marks, nobody up over that average of 10 in my home run model in this one, getting better power marks on the other teams, but definitely a spot where the Marlins can be productive, and they've got a few sluggers in here who can knock one out of the park. So figure out a good way to roster them. They're super cheap on FanDuel too, by the way. Everybody, only 2 players above 3,000. Everybody below the 3 spot in the batting order is in the 2,500 or less range.
Yeah, to be clear, like I just think for me, just to kind of elaborate the point I was making before, and I think you did a good job breaking down the hitters here. And I'm with you. Diaz has been so bad in the majors, but is a guy who was supposed to have a little more pop than he had, and it just hasn't shown it so far in the big leagues. But definitely can be there. I support those takes. I think for me though, the point is more that like I wouldn't necessarily get less of Miami, but I think I'd be more inclined to take Pavetta in lineups where I don't have Miami, just because of the fact that Miami's so highly owned. And you're normally, I know Awesemo's talked a lot about this on shows where Terry and I have done with him on the Deeper Dive, talking about how you're not normally trying to target the pitcher leverage against bats quite as much, but it's still a low enough total. And I think the fact that Pavetta is lower owned, it's probably like to me, and you might disagree with this, Terry, so I'm curious if you have a rebuttal to it, but like Pavetta seems lower owned to me because people are taking Marlins bats, not because people are seeing like, oh, like I'm talking about Pavetta and thinking that he's going to crash at some point. I don't think that's why he's not being owned on FanDuel. I think he's not being owned because people are just playing the Marlins and it's much easier to do that. So that to me would be the logic to take more Pavetta. It's not necessarily like, oh, I think Pavetta's good leverage against them, but that people are under-owning him because they just want to play Marlins instead.
I think that's absolutely why his ownership is low. We talked about the spot. His spot is the most appealing on the board in general. It's probably the most appealing thing about any pitcher on the entire slate is the team that he's going up against here that everybody's over rostering that I was just excitedly talking about. So that does make a lot of sense. Just to rehash it, the Marlins are sitting 6th worst in baseball with a 25.9% strikeout rate against righties. They have just a 131 team ISO against righties. That's 2nd worst in baseball, in front of only the Pittsburgh Pirates. They've created runs 13% worse than average against righties. So they're a bad offense going up against a pitcher who is pitching reasonably well. He's in a great spot. There's no arguing it. So yeah, I think that most of that ownership, like if it wasn't people rostering the Marlins as much as they seem to be, he would probably be up over 40-45% ownership on this slate in this spot. On a normal slate, I think he would be up it probably wouldn't be over 30% where he is now, but he would be one of the higher owned pitchers if this was an 8-game slate. So it's definitely, yeah, you're absolutely right that's where the lack of ownership on Pavetta is coming.
Yeah, so that's just my thought from seeing it. And it's worth pointing out too, Pavetta is throwing the most pitches per game or per appearance out of all the guys on the slate, 96 pitches per appearance, and does have the ability to go deep in games. I think he comes with risk, but when the ownership's going to be lower because people are just, it's really easy to get the Marlins in on FanDuel. And I think that's something that you have to keep in mind. And it's something we talk about when we are doing the chalk talk types of things, which now we've apparently filled enough time. We might not have to do that one. And it honestly would have just been confusing anyway. Boston hitters though, Terry, just to close the loop on the FanDuel slate, Boston hitter is going to be in an appealing spot against Zach Thompson, who is a righty, not a lefty, as he's appearing on some sites. That's a correction that we caught in the first half of the show, thanks to Terry. But Boston hitters in this spot, you mentioned them when we were talking about the pitching here, but it's a real Devers, Bogarts situation in particular. Verdugo and Christian Arroyo up top, I think also perfectly fine bats to get to. But as Boston stack highest implied total, Terry, and going against an unknown quantity in Zach Thompson, but one not the most impressive pitcher based on his minor league numbers. It seems like the Boston stack going to be decently owned, but also probably just have to be there, I would assume, based on your FanDuel exposure, Terry.
Yeah, I would think that this is a go-to spot. They've come up in the power index for me. It's probably, I don't know if they're outstripping the Angels any at this point, but it's probably drawn a little bit closer since the pitching change. If anybody out there is playing on one of those sites where we're picking prop bets and the props lock in the morning for home runs or upside for offense, definitely a spot to look at after the pitching change. They went up significantly. They all project well. They've got 4 guys in the lineup that are over the magic number of 10 to get a above average chance at a home run for me in this lineup. I think Hunter Renfroe probably a little underowned at 21.7%. Arroyo up top, maybe on a little bit underowned. His price is right at only 2,300. I know he's not the greatest bat in the world, but 98 plate appearances so far this year, 289, 333, 422, stolen base and a home run in there, creating runs 8% better than average. And the most important factor for him is he's going to correlate with the hitters that you really want behind him. Alex Verdugo having a great year, only striking out 12.3% of the time. He's sitting at 288, 348, 463. Had a great weekend against the Yankees. 8 home runs on the year, creating runs 21% better than average. Bogarts and Devers. Bogarts 48% better. Devers 43% better than average, creating runs. So the 3-4 hitters right there are just absolutely rock solid. And then into Renfroe. We mentioned the bottom end of the lineup maybe lacking around the Marlon Gonzalez, but I do think Kevin Plawecki could be an interesting sneaky play at the corner for no ownership and the min price. Maybe you grab some home run upside there. Enrique Hernandez is who he is, and then Bobby Dahlbeck, probably not drawing quite enough ownership for only 2,200 despite hitting at the bottom of the lineup. He's just got immense power when he connects. 6 home runs so far this year, below the Mendoza line though at 195, 248, 377. You know what you're rostering if you're putting Bobby Dahlbeck in your lineup. You're looking for that home run.
And I would think too, because he's starting against a righty, but has historically gotten more power against lefties. I presume if he's starting, he's not likely to get benched and swapped out at any point, because if they bring a lefty out of the bullpen, it's going to be better for him. So that's something to keep in mind for him, because I know it's been something when I've rostered Dahlbeck in the past, it's kind of annoying when he just gets jerked around a little bit and pinch hit for. But in this spot, I feel like if he's starting, he would be a little bit safer. But let's talk about some of the other teams. The next game, or the game that we talked about a lot of the pitching with, where we both like Dylan Bundy, or we both like Jackson Kowar, and then we both have decent feelings for Dylan Bundy. But the ownership in this game for the bats, Harry, Kansas City and the Angels both look under-owned according to the top stacks tool. On DraftKings and FanDuel, they are both looking under-owned. And it seems like here, just because of the nature of the slate, because of Bundy having a ton of ownership, because we do like Kowar. Kowar is also picking up ownership. Clearly the stacks are going to be useful here just as leverage against those plays, whether you have them a lot or if you're just have them a little bit, you're trying to go against the field. But the Royals on DraftKings, it does seem like a lot of this ownership going to Whit Merrifield. I think the Royals, if I had to choose between the two stacks, Harry, I'd prefer to go to the Royals stack against Bundy, just because I think, well, there's going to be volatility for both him and Kowar, but the Royals, to me, it's a lot of Whit Merrifield ownership driving that up. Salvador Perez, too, has been a monster recently. When you have multiple homer games, and over the course of a week, you're certainly going to be on people's radars, but him and Merrifield are the only guys who are owned. You can get Carlos Santana, who has more than enough pop, has had a 4.3% on run rate since 2019 against righties. You can also get Benintendi, who is fine, and at least a lefty, and is going to be a little bit cheaper. There's a lot of ways for me to stack up the Royals and get that ownership product down, Harry, even if you don't want to go to the crappy guys like Lopez and Calvin Gutierrez. So this spots me. I think I would favor the Royals stack relative to ownership, but the Angels or Royals, Harry, two teams that are under-owned. Which one do you want to go to?
So I wrote up the Angels this afternoon in my article. I think they're in a great spot. They're going up against the rookie who we both like. We think profiles as a good pitcher. That said, kid's never pitched in the major leagues before, so there's always consideration there. And there are definitely some metrics in terms of how the Angels hit. And we get the idea of, all right, this kid's making his debut. He's been stretched out a little bit in AAA, but if he comes out of this game in the 5th inning, then all of a sudden the Angels are dealing with the Royals bullpen that sits collectively 3rd worst in baseball with a 4.52 collective xFIP, 18th in baseball with a 24.4% strikeout rate. It's a targetable bullpen. I'm not sure if they're designating somebody as the bulk reliever coming out who's maybe getting 2 or 3 innings coming in after the kid. If the kid only goes like 4, I don't know if that's maybe Anthony Bass in there, but there's nobody really threatening that's going to walk out of that bullpen. So I think that gives a little bit of a boost to the Angels. But the high-end Angels, the premium guys that you want to roster, are going to be really highly owned. All of those guys at the top, in the top 4 part of that lineup, Mike Trout obviously still out, but all the guys in the projected high are going up over 20% ownership on FanDuel, into the 30s and 40s, into the 30s and 40s on DK. So now you're dealing with guys like Juan Lagares, who's projecting to hit 5th. He's not much of a hitter. He's a great glove, but he's not much of a professional hitter over the course of his career. I do think Jose Iglesias offers a little bit of sneaky upside. I think Taylor Ward offers some sneaky upside. So you're getting to those hitters at under 10% ownership on FanDuel. I think that's the right way to build with the Angels here. Maybe you get to Kurt Suzuki as a 23% owned catcher on DK. You're not offsetting much ownership by doing that, but he's got a little bit of upside for the price. David Fletcher's been really disappointing. So it falls off really, really quickly if you're going to the Angels. I think now that I've really absorbed the slate a little bit better, had a good look at the ownership, I think I agree that I would rather be getting to the Royals, particularly just going up against the ownership that's on Bundy, just being a little bit contrarian, grabbing some lower owned bats. That this is a team I like to get to anyway on normal size slates. And I like a lot of the hitters that we've talked about. And I think they're good. There's a couple holes, but I think they've got good options top to bottom. Like I like the idea of getting to an under-owned, very cheap Jorge Soler in the 7 spot. I know he's been bad this year, way below the Mendoza line at 174, just a 261 on base, a 303 slugging. This is a guy who hit 40 some odd home runs just 2 years ago. He's got a ton of power. You get Michael A. Taylor down there, who's always a sneaky slate breaking type of a guy. 5 home runs and 4 stolen bases on the year in 183 plate appearances. Not a high-end baseball player by any means, but a guy who can be sneaky enough and is not getting a ton of attention. And then you get all the guys in the teens. There's not a ton of FanDuel ownership on this team. There's more on the DK side of things, but I think you can work with even the DK numbers. So I think I'm with you on that. I'd rather get to the Royals. And then if you think of it in terms of backing up the Jackson Coar play, put some of the guys from his offense in there and help support the win, the under-owned win that we think could be there for him. I think that's a good approach to building with this team on this slate.
Yeah, and I think that's, to me, that the thing that jumps out, and like we were talking about here, where you do have the lower owned parts of the Angels are sort of reasonably, there's a logic to why they're lower owned, because they haven't had a ton of power. And even if you could sort of justify getting there more for some of the guys like Ward and Suzuki, I think in particular, who I agree with, are lower owned Angels plays to get and to increase that ownership product in the stack. Like the Royals actually have decent hitters. I think Soler is the one who jumps out to me too, still giving up a 93 mile per hour exit velocity on the year. Like he's still hitting the ball pretty hard, even though he hasn't gotten the results. I think that's something to keep in mind that, against Dylan Bundy, if Dylan Bundy runs bad, it's a spot where these guys can get to him and pay it off. And I think you're definitely going to be killing a large portion of lineups if Bundy somehow gets completely rocked. I don't know how likely that is, but if he gives up a lot of production, he's giving up a 5.4% on run rate on the year. And I think it is a surprisingly humid day in Anaheim too, as I mentioned earlier this morning, a 72% humidity rate, which is a little bit higher than we're normally getting in the Southern California region here. Not the hottest weather, but still something there to keep in mind. I think there's a logic here and go to the Royals and both teams too. They are, again, under-owned on the top stack stool, so you can go to both. But the Royals, to me, you're getting less ownership on good players than you are with the Angels, where those are pretty well-identified players who are going to be owned, guys like Upton, Ohtani, and Rendon, and even Jared Walsh going to be owned by a quarter of the field, at least on DraftKings. We had one question here earlier, Terry, which I want to make sure that we got to because I hinted at earlier, but from our guy, Danielle is asking about, are 4-man stacks viable on this short of a slate, or would 2- and 3-man stacks be better? It doesn't matter. For DraftKings, I feel like you're still getting to the 5-man base and then willing to take, one-offs and willing to take a one-off or even 2 one-offs against your pitcher, just because of the potential here for these guys to give up a home run and have somebody get there. But Terry, for DraftKings, you have any thoughts on that? Would you be more willing to play 4 3s on DraftKings, or would you be more willing to play 3-3, whatever on FanDuel? Are you down to get some of the shorter spins on stacks?
So yeah, on a slate of this size, I'm more willing to do oddball things because I do think you need to grab some of that unique lineup construction upside. Because when we're winning, especially with double the entry fee, smaller overall prize pool, you're talking about a smaller field, so there's fewer people creating it's not 100,000 entries. I think on FanDuel it's like 23,000 or something like that tonight. So it's a smaller pool of people creating lineups. So you can throw some oddballs in there and have some hope of getting unique. But I'm not talking about grabbing a first baseman from this team, a second baseman from that team, a third baseman from this other team, and just kind of throwing together a big, messy mix of different guys in each different lineup. You still want to have the base of at least one, if not full, maybe one hitter short. So yeah, instead of a 5, maybe you go to a 4 on DK. But you still do want to be grabbing the foundation of at least one full stack and grabbing one of these teams to go up, because there is still the likelihood that you're going to need a core of correlated hitters from one of these teams to lift the overall score of your lineup. And then you can supplement it with different scores from individuals rather than going to a second stack, because you do lose a little bit of probability that 2 stacked blocks of hitters from 2 different teams truly go off to the point where it's an irreplaceable score on a slate with this few options. Like there's not 15 games tonight where we've got the extreme likelihood that 2 different teams are going to score, 10, 12 runs and be the 2 keys to accessing the top of standings tonight. Much more likely, like I said earlier, we're going to need some of these guys who are just stringing together a couple base hits and maybe scoring a run. That might be a relevant enough score from, say, a second baseman or a catcher today, where it's okay to grab that from here or over here. It doesn't really make a difference.
All right, let's talk about the last 2 teams of hitters here. And again, we talked about most of these guys as we've gone through the slate, because you kind of have to cover a 3-gamer or a 3-gamer on FanDuel, 2-gamer on DraftKings a little more holistically. But Cubs got 3.5 implied runs against Ryan Weathers. And as we talked about, Terry and I both have some degree of interest in this team, or more interested in the field will have, it seems, based on the ownership, though. According to the top stacks tool, they do not have the highest probability of being a top stack today, or, relative to the slate, a 20% chance of being a top stack, along with 24% aggregate ownership on DraftKings. But in the spot against Ryan Weathers, I do think we've kind of covered that a lot in the pitching half of the show, but a guy who's kind of been mediocre and seems like he should be worse than he's been in terms of the results that he's given up, with only a 194 batting average allowed despite a 4.5 xFIP. The Cubs, I think, are appealing. The fact it's a little more humid than usual in San Diego as well. 80% humidity there, just shy of that. I think a little more appealing. And the Cubs, I'm kind of surprised to have this total. We had Alan in the chat asking about the weather in the games and how the Boston games could be the most appealing because of the fact the weather's hot there. And normally that's encapsulated by the Vegas total, but this Vegas total for this game where it's only 7.5 combined runs, and it is still low heat, but still high humidity, I feel like it should be closer to the 8 combined total mark, Terry. I don't know if you have any feel for that type of thing, but a 7.5 combined run total for Weathers Alzolay feels light given the matchup.
I would have guessed this probably a full run higher, to be quite honest. That's, when I have to guess, I'm usually relatively accurate with it, I'd say, within like a acceptable margin of error, but I would have been off on this one. I don't necessarily agree with Las Vegas on that, but it's the numbers we're working with. It's what's baked into my model, and the Cubs are still looking good. It's a spot, particularly the ownership, like we talked about with some of these hitters. If you want to roster a lefty and a lefty, especially if we're trusting in the idea that Ryan Weathers is not going to be long for this game, whether that's part of their game plan, taking him out after 4 or 5 innings, or whether he just gets tattooed by this team early. I don't really want to sweat the lefty thing. So for a guy like Jock Peterson, it's more of a concern than it is for Anthony Rizzo, who's just a better hitter in general. But I would roster both of those guys in this spot, particularly if I'm going to Cubs stacks, particularly given the low ownership that we already talked about on the back end of this lineup. There's a lot to like there. I mentioned Ian Happ hits from both sides of the plate earlier on, not drawing any ownership because he's really struggling this year. But like I said, the hard hit rate is still there, 87th percentile hard hit rate. When he makes contact, he is driving the ball. He's going to turn around. He's at 190, 316, 335 so far this season, but that is going to turn around. He's hit 6 home runs, only a 146 ISO, despite making a good amount of hard contact. So he just needs to put the bat on ball more. He costs $2,200 at second base and outfield on FanDuel, $4,200 in just the outfield on DK, drawing a lot more ownership, but only 2 games to choose from over there. I think it makes a ton of sense to get to. So I can work with this Cubs lineup, and I think putting together Cubs and Royals would be my approach. I might just build one lineup and throw it in tonight. And I think to give it away, it would probably be a Cubs and Royals, and I'll see what I can afford in terms of pitching.
And I have to say, Patrick Wisdom, to me, I'm a little surprised given the fact people love the shiny new toy, and he has just been a monster so far on the year with, you mentioned his numbers earlier, but a 639 ISO, 421 on base percentage, a 284 WRC plus. Those numbers aren't going to hold up, but when you look at the launch angle, he's like just driving the ball at a 21.7 degree launch angle, a 97.6 mile per hour exit velocity. Both those marks would be the best on the slate in terms of driving the ball up in the air, driving the ball in a way that could lead to home runs or at least screaming liners. I think there's a lot of ways for Wisdom to get there against Weathers, given those righty splits for him, a 226 ISO allowed to righties so far. Wisdom to me just one of those bats that I feel like I'm shocked by he's this low owned. And also a parallel thing, which I'm just observing with Jock Peterson. I don't know if you have this in front of you, Terry, but how many home runs has he hit against the lefty since 2019, would you think?
5.
0 is the number,
0,
apparently. He's got a 0% home run rate against lefties since 2019. Only 100 at bats because the Dodgers always pulled him. But that's
the Dodgers didn't let him do it at all. I thought he'd actually connected on 2 earlier this year, and I was giving him credit for some from Los Angeles.
I'm pulling something incorrectly, but I think I've got this right.
I might have just been misremembering somebody else that I looked up. I look up a lot of splits.
I don't know. Either way, Jock, there's a reason why he's never played against lefties. He has an 021 ISO against lefties, but look, I think for tournaments, he's an option. But for me, like if he's at 18% ownership and Wisdom's at 18.8, I'd rather have Wisdom, like double the amount of Wisdom than I would Jock Peterson, just for how I'm viewing it.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And it's not like all this is out of nowhere for Wisdom. He's a 29-year-old, probably quad A type talent overall. But if we're looking at his minor league numbers, he's got 2 seasons over 31 home runs in AAA on his resume. Back from in 2019, he hit 31 in 453 plate appearances in AAA. In 2017, he hit 31 in 506 plate appearances. Made fewer plate appearances in between in those seasons, so might have been dealing with an injury or something. I don't know. It's not on here. Heavy strikeout rate in the minors, mid-20s to low 30s. So he's that kind of a hitter, more of an all or nothing type of hitter that we've seen so far in the majors this year. But hey, ride the hot hand at very little ownership on the FanDuel slate. Our projected ownership, I'm sure it'll come up before lock, particularly if he's hitting 5th in this lineup, but well under 10%, under 5% projected in the last update that I ran, 2,700. There's a lot to like there. So yeah, no, definitely an argument to be made to just ride the hot hand and get on it if nobody else is.
Yeah, and Sergio Alcantara too. I feel like pretty impressive results overall. To a guy who's only had 38 at bats, but still has a 314 ISO. Like these are guys who are cheap and not going to be too highly owned. I guess Alcantara will be a little bit higher owned than Wisdom with 27% ownership on DK, but very cheap price tag. And I think those two for the Cubs stand out. Let's talk about the Padres real fast, and we'll do a quick run through the Awesemo Hall of Fame and give our home run picks. But the Padres, I think the lefty bats are going to look best against Alzolay. He's at a 217 ISO against lefties since 2019, 5.1 xFIP against lefties compared to a 3.5 xFIP against righties, less strikeouts as well. That to me, like I actually don't mind the chalky ownership for Jake Cronenworth. I also think Eric Hosmer, I mentioned earlier on the MLB strategy show, I think a solid play at under 20%. But Terry, this Padres stack, how willing are you to get there? What's the numbers for you look like, and which hitters are priorities, if any?
Eric Hosmer, I cannot figure out his 6% ownership projection on FanDuel. So that would definitely be a spot for me. Like you said, lefty power going up against Alzolay would be the way to play this. 13.4% ownership for Jake Cronenworth over there. It's definitely a spot where you can pluck a few hitters out of this lineup, and then just, whether you build in Fernando Tatis, Manny Machado, who are drawing a lot of ownership, is up to you. But that's, certainly you don't want to leave the best players on this team out of the stack. But yeah, I think Tommy Pham is maybe a little bit under-owned, and then the back end of the lineup, Jurickson Profar's got plenty of talent in terms of mid-range power and a lot of speed. I'm not going to sell Victor Caratini to anybody, but Will Myers is sitting right there. Not that much ownership on the FanDuel slate, has a decent stick, decent amount of power. So I think there's some unique ways to put this Padres lineup together. It's strange that they're going this under-owned. I guess it's mostly just driven by 58% ownership on Alzolay on DK, only drawing 16% on the FanDuel slate though. So it's a little bit confusing in terms of nobody going to him or really the Padres. Not nobody going to the Padres, but lower ownership than I would expect, with not a lot of people going to Alzolay on the FanDuel slate.
And if you're doing that full DK stack, trying to get Hosmer in, trying to get Profar, Caratini, I guess if you were willing to stack up the catcher and hope that leads to something, those are the guys who are lower owned who are going to drive down that ownership product if you are stacking up the Padres. But a lot of ownership going to Cronenworth and Tatis, and then a good amount going to Pham and Machado for attacking the Padres. Let's do the Awesemo Hall of Fame real fast, Tyler, if you're ready to hit that. All right. Awesemo Hall of Fame, of course, the way you get in here, and we always want to see you guys get in because you get a free month of Awesemo Plus for yourself if you finish in the top 3 of a tournament of 5,000 people or more. And that has to be not like a multi-million person chop like some of the NBA Showdown slates have been recently. So keep that in mind as well. But you can see some of our recent success. And here's Matthew something here again, first year playing NBA DFS, and he's hooked. Glad to have stumbled upon the Awesemo team and product. Great to see that. Nice third place finish for him. We've also got Mitchell Newquist in here, getting a good job with the NASCAR data, which is a big way to add to the process as well for yourself. We do some shows on that on the channel with our guy Phil and a rotating co-host group here for him on the channel. But NASCAR, definitely a lot of people having success out there, including Mitch Dog. Then we have the SF Deck here, TO, 6K of tax-free money for what? I don't know why it's tax-free money, but okay, I hope you still have to pay taxes. I don't know. We don't have a promo code for you to not pay taxes, but good job by him. And good job taking in first, winning that 6K. And we have Ken D. Batista here, getting fighting his bias confirmation on Boban or with it, or I guess looking for support on it, whatever that case may be. A nice win for him. And then we also have Cornelius Herford to close it out, $75 win in the quarter jukebox. And that's, we're happy to see those wins as much as anything. It's nice if you win 100K, nice if you win 50K, nice if you win just $75. It's all relative to what makes you guys feel good and motivated to keep playing DFS. So shout out all those guys, and make sure to download the avatar at awesemo.com/avatar and tweet your wins. It's at AwesemoHOF. Terry, close us out with a home run pick.
This afternoon in the article, I went with Mr. Jared Walsh from the Los Angeles Angels. He was one of the, maybe not the flashiest name on there, but a guy pretty likely to hit a home run. It's basically Angels and Red Sox up at the top of my home run board today if you're looking for power.
And our producer, Tyler, will apparently take Salvador Perez. I didn't know that he could pick ahead of me in the pecking order, but sure, go ahead, Tyler. Have fun with that one. I will take a righty from the Cubs just to back out my theory. You know what? I talked to this guy enough. Patrick Wisdom, the home run pick of the day, and hope he pays off at that one. Follow at DigitalB21. That's Terry's handle. You can see whenever he's doing shows. Follow at Chris Spags. You can see whenever I'm doing shows. I always make sure to retweet the links and put them out there. Make sure to follow at Awesemo_com. Check out the pin tweet right now. We also have a giveaway going for a free Awesemo Plus membership. So go take a look at that pin tweet. And there's a lot of giveaways that go through that Twitter handle. Sometimes ones we don't have time to hit on these shows. So go check out Awesemo_com on Twitter. And we'll see you guys again very soon. So enjoy the slate. Pay attention to the lineups for the late games and enjoy your days. Good luck.